Hello everyone, have a nice day. Today we explore The Witness in the Ledger. Ms. Hoa returns with a key page. A weathered accounting book, a torn seam, and one initial K turn simple numbers into testimony. Beside Uri and Tu Tieu, Ms. Hoa brings the page into daylight. Voices only, no cameras. If you find it interesting, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. This is the page they told me to destroy. Under the banyan's cool canopy, Ms. Hoa lifts a weather-browned ledger into morning light. Villagers press along the steps of the old hall. Incense threads the air. A kettle hisses from a side stall like a late warning. The torn seam glints beside a faded stamp, a single initial K. The name murmurs through the courtyard like a pulled net. Kai. Even the birds still. Then time pulls backward to the night before, when thunder lingered as a smell more than a sound. A careful knock touched the gate, small, deliberate, as if a secret asked permission to enter. Tu Tieu stood at the basin, scrubbing lemongrass mud from her hands, and saw the figure through mist. Posture straight, breath uneven. Umbrella faded to the color of old paper. Ms. Hoa. She stepped inside. The umbrella dripped onto the threshold, a metronome of guilt. Her blouse was simple. Silver strands stitched sleeplessness through her hair. In her arms lay something wrapped in cloth, held the way one holds a kept promise. "I've kept this for 3 years," she said. "It needs to go back to its rightful place." Uri, sleeves damp from mending the window latch, looked up as the cloth loosened and a ledger kissed the wooden table with a papery sigh. The binding was tired, corners rubbed pale. One page bore a strip of tape like a healed scar. "From Thien Truong?" he asked. "The quarter before the wall fell," Ms. Hoa answered. Her fingers hovered over the patched page, then turned it. Ink blurred where water had tried to erase it. A stamp endured. An initial endured. K. The letter seemed to expand the room. Wind moved through the grapefruit trees and tapped the shutter's soft knuckles, soft warnings. Ms. Hoa lowered her voice. "Last night, someone came to my door for this. They said if I didn't hand it over, silence would arrive another way." Tu Tieu nodded once, a motion more vow than gesture. Uri drew the ledger closer and flattened the page with his palm. At first, the numbers behaved like numbers wages, overtime, supply costs. Then the wrongness presented itself. A bonus column redrawn in a darker hand, the sum rising 2 days before the collapse, as if money had known the timing of a tragedy. "They rewrote a reward to cover a loss," Uri said, chest tight around the line. "They made me copy a line," Ms. Hoa whispered, then told me to tear the page out. I stamped it. I did not sign. That pen was not mine. Tu Tieu's fingers whitened on the table's edge before she realized it. She eased them open. Uri slid a cup of ginger tea to Ms. Hoa. Steam unrolled between them like visible breath. They read not as clerks, but as witnesses. The ledger became more than tallies. It inhaled old air names, hours, storms. A crate that never arrived. A night shift stretched thin while rain battered the yard. The initial repeated itself, small and stubborn, like a footprint in a place that should have stayed clean. "Tomorrow," Tu Tieu said, the tea's heat settling into courage. "The people who live this will hear it. No lawyers, no press, just the workers and the elders." "Let daylight hear it," Ms. Hoa replied. A tear cut a clean path down her cheek and did not ask permission to fall. Afternoon, thin to amber. Uri bound the ledger with a length of jute string, the kind they saved for lemongrass bundles, and did not hide it. He set it in the center of the table like a lamp. "We meet at the banyan," he said. "Word is sent. No cameras, no recordings, voices only." "That's all the truth needs," Tu Tieu answered. They ate simply rice, leftover fish, and salt food that tasted like honesty after long fear. The house steadied around them like a small boat with a heavy anchor. Ms. Hoa dozed near the doorway light. Her shoulders, for once, were lower than her ears. Uri checked the gate twice. The altar candle shrank to a dot. The window stayed cracked so the rain smell could keep telling the room that the storm had passed, even if the story had not. Around midnight, the bamboo whispered. A weight tested the latch, neither a friend's knock nor a drunk's mistake, but a measured touch. The gate answered with a faint metallic syllable, as if a coin had been placed on a scale. Uri's eyes opened in the dark. He did not speak. His hand found Tu Tieu's, warm, tense, and for 3 shared breaths, they listened. A shoe scraping gravel, the patience of a watcher, the retreat when something of the candle flame, the ledger in full view suggested, not tonight. Fear receded with the footsteps. Its aftertaste, metallic and thin, lingered and thinned. Dawn arrived clean. The village woke to low, familiar noises. A ladle striking a pot, a rooster's hard insistence, the rubber sigh of sandals on wet steps. Uri carried out 3 folding chairs. "They agreed," he said. "Village hall. Voices only." "Good," Tu Tieu said, tucking the ledger under her arm the way one guards a child who can walk, but not yet cross a road alone. They took the gravel path together with Uri, Tu Tieu, Miss Hoa, past friendly dogs behind fences, and the pond where children would later erase the green with laughter and stones. The banyan's shade felt older than anyone's fear. People gathered, elders with eyes that never forgot, workers with mud ghosts on their boots, neighbors who had inherited the story through thin walls and persistent rumor. And time returned to the present. Ms. Hoa stood small but upright. The paper trembled in her hand, morning light gilding its ragged edge. "This is the page they told me to destroy," she said again, steadier now. "When you tear a page from the truth, the book never closes right." The crowd leaned in, the signature, the stamp, the seam where glue pretended to be time. Anger, relief, disbelief moved like wind through grass noise without words, then settled into listening. Uri stepped forward. 3 years ago, I didn't make that wall fall," he said, voice straight as a plumb line. "But I stayed silent when I saw how they rewrote it. I called it waiting. It was fear." A thin sound escaped someone near the back, half exhale, half yes. Tu Tieu spread copies onto the table beside the ledger, pay slips, the worker's log, and a faded photograph of the broken wall. "We aren't here to accuse," she said, placing each sheet as if measuring its weight. "We're here to finish what was started." An elder with oil-stained hands stepped closer. His palm hovered above the book like a blessing deciding itself. The morning hush drew tight, ready to crack. The hush finally broke. Under the banyan, Ms. Hoa held the ledger steady with both hands. Her voice was small but clear. She read the parts that mattered. Dates, hours, the bonus column that had been redone in a darker pen 2 days before the collapse. She pointed to the faint glue seam where a page had once been torn and later slipped back. Beside the faded stamp, the single initial K caught the light and seemed to steady her. Uri stood close enough to see every stroke of ink. Tu Tieu laid the extra notes on the table, copies of payslips, and a faded photo of the damaged wall, then stepped back so the paper, not their faces, was in the center. No one argued. People listened. That was enough. "We won't accuse anyone here," Tu Tieu said, her tone even. "We only show what is on the page." "And what is not," Uri added, tapping the gap where a clean signature should have lived. Ms. Hoa stamped, but she didn't sign. The group pressed nearer, then stilled again, as if the whole courtyard had learned a new way to breathe. A motorbike passed on the road and kept going. Incense drifted. A kettle hissed in a far corner, and the sound was comforting ordinary life beside an unordinary moment. When Ms. Hoa finished reading, she set the ledger flat and let her hands fall to her sides. "I kept it because I could not sleep without it," she said, "and I could not sleep with it. Today, I return it to daylight." That was all. It was enough. They did not make speeches. They did not call names. Uri closed the ledger carefully and tied the jute string around it the way he had the night before, not hiding. He looked at the small crowd. "We will take this to the district tomorrow. Whoever wants to come may walk with us. No cameras. Voices only." Several heads nodded. No one needed to be counted. They left the banyan and walked the gravel path home, Uri on one side of the ledger, Tu Tieu on the other, Ms. Hoa a half pace behind, lighter than she had been in the morning. The village moved around them without fuss. Dogs dozing behind fences, a child chasing a leaf with outstretched hands, a door clacking shut somewhere with the finality of chores done. At the house, they set the ledger on the table where last night's tea ring still marked the wood. Sunlight slipped through the window and warmed the cover. The room felt familiar again. Ladle, bowl, kettle, the soft rhythm of a home that had survived storms before. "Lunch?" Tu Tieu asked. "Please," Ms. Hoa said, and smiled like someone who had put down a heavy sack and discovered her hands again. They ate plain rice, greens, and a little fish. No one tried to make meaning out of the food. When they finished, Uri refilled the kettle and cleaned the cups. It was the kind of quiet work that makes a room trustworthy. Ms. Hoa watched him and let her shoulders drop. "Do you think they'll come for it again?" she asked. "They might," Uri said, drying a cup. "But today, they saw where it lives." "And with whom?" Tu Tieu added. Ms. Hoa nodded. She wasn't afraid, not exactly. She was finished with fear in the old shape. "If they knock, I will answer," she said. "But I will not open the door alone." Afternoon thinned toward gold. They checked the string around the ledger, not because they doubted the knot, but because the act of checking soothed the nerves that memory sometimes left behind. Uri placed the book inside a plain cloth bag and set it by the door. He did not hide it on a shelf. It would leave in the morning. It could look at the evening light until then. For a while they said almost nothing. The orchard did the talking, leaves clicking softly. A breeze moving the bamboo with a sound like pages turned far away. The world smelled less of thunder now, more of clean soil and tea. As the sun lowered, they walked back to the empty hall. No crowd waited. That was fine. Uri opened the bag and let the late light find the torn corner. The initial K glinted again, not like a threat now, but like a pin on a map you no longer avoid. He didn't touch it. He just watched it stop trembling. "Tomorrow, we will carry it together," he said. "Together," Tu Tieu echoed. "Together," Ms. Hoa repeated, and the words sat right in her mouth. They locked the house early. Uri checked the gate once, then once more, out of habit rather than fear. A single altar candle threw a small halo on the wall. Tu Tieu shielded it with her palm until the flame learned the room. The ledger rested on the table with the bag folded beneath it as a cushion, as if it were an old friend sleeping between them. Night brought ordinary sounds. The drip of a tap, a scooter somewhere far, crickets stitching the edges of the yard. Near midnight, footsteps paused at the lane and moved on. No one rose. The village, somehow, was awake with them without making a sound. Before dawn, Uri brewed tea. They drank without words, then stepped outside and started down the path. The sky was the soft color that belongs to stars and apologies. The bag with the ledger hung from Uri's shoulder. Ms. Hoa's stride was measured, steady. Tu Tieu walked close enough that the bag brushed her sleeve now and then. A small, rhythmic promise. When the banyan came into view, the same few neighbors waited, not a crowd, only enough to make the path feel shared. No one held a camera. Someone carried a thermos. Someone else had a folded piece of paper with a list of bus times in case. It all looked simple. It all was. They reached the hall and kept going, turning toward the road that led to the district office. The morning air smelled like wet leaves and clean errands. A motorbike idled once and rolled past. The village shrank behind them and didn't feel lost, just smaller at the right distance. No one tried to take the bag. No one blocked the path. By the time the sun cleared the low ridge, the three of them were a quiet shape moving at the same pace, carrying something that used to be heavy and now felt exact. If anyone asked what had changed, the answer would have been plain. Not the numbers in the ledger, but where the ledger lived. Not the past, but the light around it. They walked on, and the initial on that page, once a shadow sat under the morning, like a fact that could finally be looked at. The truth did not shout. It kept time with their steps. And for the first time in 3 years, Ms. Hua's hands were free, Uri's shoulders were level, and Tu Tieu's breath was steady enough to carry them all the way to the door that needed knocking.
Bà Hoa mang đến một cuốn sổ cái đã cũ từ xưởng thiên trường và để lộ một trang vá víu. Một cột thưởng bị sửa đổi và chữ cái đầu K bên cạnh một con tem đã phai màu. Trong bếp của Uri và Tự Tiêu, nỗi sợ hãi biến thành mục đích. Họ chọn ánh sáng ban ngày, dưới gốc đa chỉ có tiếng nói không có máy ảnh. Vào buổi sáng, bà Hoa đọc những dòng chính. Uri và Tự Tiêu sắp xếp các phiếu lương và một bức ảnh để trang giấy lên tiếng. Nàng chấp nhận quyền giám hộ và chuẩn bị các bản sao cho huyện. Một nỗ lực phá cổng của họ đã củng cố quyết tâm. Trở về nhà, cuốn sổ cái nằm trong tầm mắt được buộc bằng đay như những lời hứa. Đến bình minh, cả ba cùng nhau bước trên con đường sỏi, túi nhẹ hơn vì để sự thật đã được chia sẻ. Câu chuyện kết thúc không phải bằng một tiếng hét, mà bằng những bước chân vững chắc. Bằng chứng được lưu trữ và nỗi sợ hãi qua đi. Và một chữ cái đầu tiên cuối cùng được giữ trong ánh mặt trời.